Hi, good morning children. In the last class we learned about the structure of brain and the different parts of the brain. The important parts of the brain, the main parts of the brain are as cerebrum, cerebellum, medulla oblongata, thalamus and hypothalamus. And I think you learned the parts of the brain and the functions of each and every part. And today's class, we are going to learn about the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the continuation of medulla oblongata. That is the first important thing you want to learn is that the spinal cord is the continuation of medulla oblongata. And like that of brain, the spinal cord is also an important organ. The spinal cord is one of the important organ of our body. So it is also protected by three methods. Like that of brain, the spinal cord is also protected by three ways. Firstly, the spinal cord is protected inside a bone that is called as backbone or vertebral column. And secondly, the spinal cord is protected inside a three-layered membrane that is called as meninges. And like that of brain, the spinal cord is also protected by cerebrospinal fluid. So these are the three ways by which the spinal cord is protected. It is protected inside a bone called as backbone or vertebral column, a three-layered membrane called as meninges, and in between the layers of meninges a fluid is present and that is called as cerebrospinal fluid. And another important part that is seen in spinal cord that is called as central canal. The central canal is seen in the middle of the spinal cord. And this central canal is also filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. In the spinal cord, the white matter is seen outside and the grey matter is seen inside. മനുഷ്യ ശരീരത്തിലെ മറ്റൊരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സെൻട്രൽ നെർവസ് സിസ്റ്റത്തിന്റെ മറ്റൊരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഭാഗമാണ് സ്പൈനൽ കോഡ്. വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഒരു അവയവം ആയതുകൊണ്ട് ഇതും വളരെ സേഫ് ആയിട്ടാണ് നമ്മുടെ ശരീരത്തിനുള്ളിൽ സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. ബ്രെയിൻ സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത് പോലെ തന്നെ സ്പൈനൽ കോഡും സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത് മൂന്ന് സംരക്ഷണ ഉപാധികളിൽ കൂടിയാണ്. ഒന്നാമതായിട്ട് ഇത് നട്ടെല്ലിന് ഉള്ളിലായിട്ട് സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. രണ്ടാമതായിട്ട് ബ്രെയിൻ സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നത് പോലെ മെനിഞ്ചസ് കൊണ്ടുള്ള മൂന്ന് ലെയറുള്ള പാളിയായിട്ടുള്ള മെനിഞ്ചസ് കൊണ്ടുള്ള ആവരണമുണ്ട് സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിന് പുറമെ. ഇവ കൂടാതെ സെറിബ്രോസ്പൈനൽ ഫ്ലൂയിഡും ഈ മെനിഞ്ചസിന്റെ ലെയേഴ്സിനുള്ളിൽ അടങ്ങിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇത് കൂടാതെ സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിന്റെ മധ്യഭാഗത്തിന് പറയുന്നത് സെൻട്രൽ കനാൽ എന്നാണ്. ഇതിന്റെ ഉള്ളിലും ധാരാളമായിട്ട് സെറിബ്രോസ്പൈനൽ ഫ്ലൂയിഡ് അടങ്ങിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇത്തരത്തില് സ്പൈനൽ കോഡ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സുഷുമ്ന എന്നാണ് ഇതിന് മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയുക. സ്പൈനൽ കോഡ് വളരെ സുരക്ഷിതമായിട്ട് നമ്മുടെ ശരീരത്തിനുള്ളിൽ സംരക്ഷിക്കപ്പെട്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. A dorsal root and a ventral root together to form a spinal nerve, or the spinal nerve consists of a dorsal root and a ventral root. A spinal nerve is the joining form of a dorsal root and a ventral root, or a dorsal root and a ventral root join to form a spinal nerve. The sensory impulses reach the spinal cord through the dorsal root and the motor impulses goes out of the spinal cord through the ventral root. The sensory impulses reaches the spinal cord through the dorsal root and the motor impulses goes out of the spinal cord through the ventral root. സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിൽ നിന്ന് പുറപ്പെടുന്ന 31 ജോഡി സ്പൈനൽ നെർവ്സ് ആണ് ഉള്ളത്. ഒരു സ്പൈനൽ നെർവ് ഫോം ചെയ്യുന്നത് 2 ഭാഗം ഒന്നിച്ചു ചേരുമ്പോഴാണ് ഒരു സ്പൈനൽ നെർവ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. ഒരു ഭാഗത്തെ ഡോർസൽ റൂട്ട് എന്നും മറുഭാഗത്തെ വെൻട്രൽ റൂട്ട് എന്നുമാണ് പറയുക. ഇനി സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിലേക്ക് സെൻസറി ഇമ്പൾസസ് എല്ലാം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ശരീരത്തിന്റെ വിവിധ ഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നുള്ള ഇമ്പൾസസ് എല്ലാം സ്പൈനൽ കോഡ് എത്തുന്നത് ഡോർസൽ റൂട്ടിൽ കൂടിയാണ്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിൽ നിന്ന് പോകുന്ന ഇമ്പൾസസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സ്പൈനൽ കോഡിൽ നിന്ന് പോകുന്ന സന്ദേശങ്ങൾ വെൻട്രൽ റൂട്ടിൽ കൂടിയാണ് പുറത്തേക്ക് വഹിക്കുന്നത്. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു ഡോർസൽ റൂട്ടും ഒരു വെൻട്രൽ റൂട്ടും ജോയിൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടാണ് ഒരു സ്പൈനൽ നെർവ് ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. The impulses from the different parts of the body are transmitted to and from the brain through the spinal cord. And the spinal cord also coordinates the repeated movements like walking, running, etc. It coordinates the repeated movements like walking, running, etc. In your textbook, figure 1.5, there is a diagram is there. Observe this diagram. You can see some accidental and involuntary responses are there. And this type of responses are called as reflex actions. So the reflex action can be defined as the accidental and involuntary response towards stimuli. Accidental and involuntary actions towards stimuli are called as reflex actions. And how does the reflex action happens? In your textbook, an illustration is given there. Observe this illustration. When a stimulus happens, impulses are generated in the receptors, specific receptors. When a stimulus happens, impulses are generated from the respective receptors. That is the first thing happens. Then the receptor carries impulses to the sensory neuron, or the sensory neuron carries the impulses to the spinal cord. The interneuron that connect the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, and the interneuron also generate quick responses according to the sensory neuron. Then the motor neuron carries the information from the spinal cord to the related muscles, and the next stage withdraws the hands by the action of muscles. All these are the different stages of the reflex action. First one, that is receptors. Second one, action of sensory neuron, action of interneuron, action of motor neuron, and the action of related muscles. All these are the pathway of the reflex action. The pathway of impulses in the reflex action is called as reflex arc, or reflex arc is the pathway of impulses in the reflex action. Reflex arc is the pathway of impulses in the reflex action. The spinal cord acts as the center of reflex actions. All these reflex actions are happens under the control of spinal cord. Most of the reflex actions are under the control of spinal cord, and the reflex actions are under the control of spinal cord are called as spinal reflex. Some actions like we blink our eyes when light suddenly falls on our eyes, or an object moves towards our eyes. This type of actions are not under the control of spinal cord. These actions are under the control of cerebrum or brain, and the reflex actions are under the control of spinal cord are called as spinal reflex, and the reflex actions are under the control of brain are called as cerebral reflex. So these are the two type of reflexes. First one cerebral reflex and second one spinal reflex. The reflex action under the control of spinal cord are called as spinal reflex, and the reflex actions are under the control of brain are called as cerebral reflex. Now we can watch the video related to reflex action.
Reflex action mechanism. In reflex action, fine tips, that is dendrites of receptors, that is sensory neurons, quickly relay a message in the form of electric impulse via sensory nerves to the spinal cord. The spinal cord then sends information, impulse, via motor nerves to effectors, that is muscles or glands. The reflex actions generally involve spinal cord for quick response to specific stimulus, or otherwise the thinking process of brain may take time and delay the response, which may harm the animal. However, information input also goes on to reach the brain where thinking process occurs. The path taken by nerve impulse in a reflex action is called reflex arc. When our hand accidentally touches a hot object, the heat is sensed by thermoreceptors present in the skin of hands. The receptors trigger nerve impulses in sensory neurons. Sensory neurons transmit the message to the spinal cord. In spinal cord, impulse is passed on to the interneurons, which in turn pass it to the motor neurons. The motor neurons transmit the instruction to the muscles in our arm. The arm muscles contract and pull our hand away from the hot object. This is also referred as spinal reflex. Reflex arcs have evolved in animals because the thinking process of the brain is relatively slow. Reflex arcs have evolved as an efficient way of functioning in the absence of true thought processes. There are some reflexes which involve brain as well. They are termed as cerebral reflexes, for example, salivation at the sight or smell of food. Contraction of pupil of human eye in the presence of light. Significance of reflex action. 1. It avoids overloading of brain. 2. It results in quick response, otherwise the thinking process of brain may take time and delay the response, which may harm the animal.
I think all of you understood all these things related to reflex action. And now you note down some questions. Question number 1. The protection of the spinal cord. Question number 1. The protection of the spinal cord. Question number 2. The formation of spinal nerves. Question number 2. The formation of spinal nerves. Then the third question. The functions of the spinal cord. The functions of the spinal cord. Next question. What are called as reflex action? What are called as reflex action? Next question. Explain the pathway of impulses in a reflex action. Explain the pathway of impulses in a reflex action. Write down the answers of all these questions and come to the next class. Thank you.